Hi, my name is Jessica Goretzky, and I'm a biologist for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the nearshore fish community and giving a general status report of walleye, smallmouth bass, and yellow perch in Lake Ontario, as well as a quick overview of some walleye movement research that's been done in Lake Ontario's eastern basin. To begin, I just want to touch on some of the locations and data collection methods we use to survey the lake. Both Ontario and New York run angler creel surveys. In New York, this runs from the Niagara River to the Association Island Cut in Henderson, New York. This does not, however, include any of the eastern basin for New York's waters. In Ontario, the angler survey covers the Bay of Quinte. In the summer, gill nets are set across the Bay of Quinte in both Ontario and New York's eastern basins. Additionally, fall bottom trawling occurs in the Bay of Quinte to assess year zero walleye numbers. So, diving right into our fish community objectives, FCO 1.0 is our nearshore zone goal, which is to protect, restore, and sustain the diversity of the nearshore fish community, with an emphasis on self-sustaining native fishes, including walleye, yellow perch, lake sturgeon, smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, sunfish, northern pike, muskellunge, and the American eel. However, for the purposes of this presentation, I will be focusing on walleye, yellow perch, and smallmouth bass, though I will touch on some lake sturgeon research that's recently occurred. The primary focus of this talk is FCO 1.1, which is to maintain healthy, diverse fisheries in the nearshore waters of Lake Ontario. So I'll cover recent trends in both Ontario and New York's Lake Ontario populations of walleye, perch, and smallmouth, with emphasis on stocks in the eastern basin of Lake Ontario. First up, we have yellow perch. For yellow perch, the data I'll be presenting is concentrated in the circled region, a combination of commercial harvest and annual gill netting results. Annual commercial catches of yellow perch are highly variable in both Ontario and New York. In 2021, perch catches comprised nearly 30% of the total commercial harvest by weight, with over 100,000 pounds of perch caught. That was a 50% increase over 2020 harvests. In New York in 2020, commercial harvests were over 98% perch, with over 58,000 pounds harvested, which was a 7% increase over 2019 harvests. For gill netting assessments occurring in Ontario waters, the average catch per unit effort, or number of fish caught in a gill net per overnight net set, was higher in the Bay of Quinte than in Ontario's eastern basin. The dashed line indicates a fisheries management plan target of a CPUE of 114.5, which has not been met since 2010, although there has been a general increase in catches over the last 10 years. While there is no management plan target for perch catches in Ontario's eastern basin, catches have generally been lower. Catches in this basin have been at or below the 10-year average for at least 5 of the last 10 years. Catches in New York's eastern basin are fairly variable, but have been at or above the 10-year average, denoted by the dashed line, for 6 of the last 10 years. As a whole, yellow perch populations seem to be maintaining course in recent years. Okay, so moving on to walleye. For walleye, the presented data will include gill netting data from the Bay of Quinte and Ontario and New York's eastern basins, bottom trawl data from the Bay of Quinte, commercial harvest in Ontario's waters, as well as recreational open water and ice fishery angler surveys. Additionally, the acoustic telemetry research spanned much of the lake but is focused on the eastern basin. In the Bay of Quinte, there is a 3-season recreational open water fishery, as well as a recreational ice fishery. In 2019, during the last open water angler survey, 74% of recreational fishing effort targeted walleye specifically, with a total of 191,000 angler hours and 29,000 fish harvested. The size of fish and the age of caught fish varied throughout the season and angler location. Recreational harvest in the Bay of Quinte comprises the vast majority of harvest by weight at an average of 67% of the total, with the ice fishery harvest clocking in at roughly 8%. By comparison, the commercial fishery, which is highly regulated and restricted, makes up about 25% of the total Bay of Quinte walleye harvest, with about 23,000 pounds of fish taken in 2021. Commercial harvest of walleye is variable year to year, but is limited by quota in 8 commercial fishing quota zones in Ontario waters. In 2021, total harvest of walleye by weight increased by 5%. In the salt bottom trawl survey occurring in the Bay of Quinte, age 0 walleye or fish born earlier that year are targeted. This helps researchers assess recruitment of walleye. Year 0 walleye catches have been at or above Bay of Quinte targets for 6 of the last 10 years. This survey helps gauge the relative strength of walleye year classes. Good year classes occurred in 2018 and 2020, while the 2021 year class was considered fair. The last 3 excellent year classes were seen in 2008, 2014, and 2015. Outside of the Bay of Quinte and New York's Eastern Basin gill netting, those 3 excellent year classes made larger contributions in the total walleye catch. While no 2020 year class fish were caught in this assessment in 2021, these fish may appear in the 2022 survey. In Ontario waters, assessment catches of walleye in the Bay of Quinte have been at or above management plan targets for only 4 of the last 10 years, denoted by the darker dashed line, but in general are increasing. In Ontario's Eastern Basin, catches of walleye have been at or above plan targets for 9 of the last 10 years, shown by the lighter line, and are also generally increasing. Catches of walleye on the New York side of the Eastern Basin have been lower than those in recent years in Ontario waters. Catches have been below the 10-year average, as shown by the black dashed line, for all but 3 of the last 10 years, but have generally been increasing since a low in 2015. However, with recent year class production seen in the Bay of Quinte, these numbers may improve in the near future. In terms of other walleye research in the Bay of Quinte and the Eastern Basin, Elliott et al. Examined the timing of migration of walleye into and out of 2 spawning rivers, the Trent and Napanee rivers, as well as pre- and post-spawning movement of fish around the Bay of Quinte. They found that there was high spawning site fidelity of walleye for both rivers, over 90% for each, and that less than 10% of the acoustic tagged fish remained as residents in the bay year-round. Among their findings, they determined that females and larger fish tended to travel further, consistent with other similar research in Lake Erie. On the graph, which illustrates the proportion of tagged individuals occupying different geographic regions across the Bay of Quinte and the Eastern Basin, they found that fish exited through the Bay of Quinte, but a small proportion exited through the Murray Canal at the far west end of the bay. Post-spawn, fish were generally evenly distributed across the Eastern Basin. Melville, shown in turquoise, and the Kingston Basin in dark green were primarily used in the early summer by Napanee River fish. By August, fish tended to congregate around the Timber Island region, especially large Trent River females. Migration strategies varied more by size and sex than by spawning river. Elliott et al. Suggest using migration research to improve protection of specific stocks of fish, perhaps establishing protected areas or implementing other management strategies by protecting larger, older fish during periods of congregation during their migration. Okay, moving on to smallmouth bass. Much of the data I'll be presenting for smallmouth bass has been collected through gill netting in Ontario's waters and New York's waters of the Eastern Basin. Catches of smallmouth bass in Ontario's Eastern Basin are typically lower than those found in New York waters, but have generally been consistent across the entire time series. For catches of smallmouth bass in New York waters, the 10-year average of 6.2 smallmouth bass caught per net night, shown as the black dotted line, has been above 5 of the last 10 years' catches. In 2021, the smallmouth bass catch decreased 26% from 2020 values. While there is no assessment of year 0 smallmouth bass to highlight strong year classes, there have been several cohorts that have consistently appeared in catches over the last 5 years, namely the 2016 and 2018 year classes. The 2018 year classes made up the greatest proportion of bass caught in New York's Eastern Basin warm water assessment in 2020 and 2021. Since 1992, bass over 4 pounds have appeared, but only since 1998 have they appeared consistently. In 2021, of the 158 bass caught in this assessment, 14% were over 4 pounds. Bass over 5 pounds have consistently appeared since 2005, and since 2011, over 0.3% of bass captured annually have weighed 6 pounds or more. These increases in weight are most likely attributed to good growth and condition, rather than an increased abundance of older bass. Every year, the New York DEC conducts a survey of recreational fishing boats on Lake Ontario, spanning from the Niagara River to the Association Island Cut in Jefferson County, New York, covering about 30 access channels of varying use intensity. This survey does not, however, currently cover the eastern basin of the lake. While data were not collected in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, catch rates of smallmouth bass per boat trip have maintained course for the last 10 years. 2021 catches were 15% above the 10-year average, but were only about half the average catch for the entire time series. Several factors that may have contributed to this long-term decline beginning in the early to mid-2000s include cladophora growth, proliferation of the round goby, and viral hemorrhagic septicemia virus. Moving on to briefly discuss Lake Sturgeon. The final nearshore zone objective that I'll be focusing on is FCO 1.2, which is to restore lake sturgeon populations and increase abundance of naturally produced lake sturgeon to levels that would support sustainable fisheries. The trend indicator that I'll be looking at is the increasing abundance of lake sturgeon within the next 20 years. Lake sturgeon, which are one of the rarer species caught in New York's Eastern Basin assessment, have been caught in low numbers since 1995. Since then, at least one sturgeon has been caught in all but 2 years since then. From 1976 through 1994, only one sturgeon was captured in 19 years of sampling. In 2021, 10 sturgeon were caught during this assessment, with a very low but generally increasing catch. Improvements in catch rates are most likely attributable to restoration efforts, including stocking and habitat improvement. So, to wrap things up, discuss some of our progress in meeting some of these fish community objectives. In regards to FCO 1.1, maintaining healthy, diverse fisheries, for walleye, for year one fish that we catch in assessment nets in the Eastern Basin, numbers are above fisheries management plan targets in Ontario, but numbers in New York's Eastern Basin have recently been below the long-term average. The Bay of Quinte is also trending below FMP targets, but management plan targets for year zero fish collected in the annual trawl assessment in the Bay of Quinte have been maintained. There is, however, some promise with a good year class in 2020. This may recruit better to assessment gear in the coming years. The commercial fishery is fairly stable and heavily regulated. Research being done on walleye migration trends might better influence fishing season regulations to protect specific stocks of fish. In general, in terms of meeting the FCO for walleye, it's generally mixed, not quite there across the entire survey area. For yellow perch, in Ontario, the trends in commercial harvest over the last decade have dipped compared to previous years, but rose again last year. Perch comprise almost 30% of the total commercial harvest by weight. In contrast, the commercial harvest in New York is almost entirely perch with highly variable catches. In 2020, the total harvest increased from the 2019 amounts. In the Bay of Quinte, assessment catches have not met management plan targets since 2010. Eastern Basin catches are lower and variable, but seem to be maintaining trajectory. 5 of the last 10 years were at or above the long-term average. New York's Eastern Basin has been at or above the 10-year average for the past 6 to 10 years. For yellow perch, the assessment would be mixed. The population seems to be maintaining, but not meeting management plan targets in the Bay of Quinte. For smallmouth bass, catches have been consistently low but stable in the Ontario Eastern Basin. The New York Eastern Basin has had catches at or above the long-term mean for 5 of the last 10 years. Angler catches have also been above the 10-year average, but below historical catches. In general, bass catches have been generally stable and appear to be maintaining course. As a whole, for meeting FCO 1.1, we've got kind of a mixed status. We do appear to be maintaining course, but there are some slight declines. For FCO 1.2, for lake sturgeon populations, lake sturgeon are at least consistently showing up in New York Eastern Basin nets, with at least one fish sampled in the last 25-27 years. The CUEs are generally very low, but typically increasing, and it seems promising for lake sturgeon restoration as a whole. And with that, I'd like to conclude and thank Erin Brown and Sarah Beach for their contributions, and Michael Connerton as well. Thank you. Any questions?